Part 3. A Bright and Blinding Light. Unlike understanding exactly when I got onto the internet, I do remember the moment that I started to understand something called the World Wide Web. I was a temp at MIT, where I was working in the physics department, where there was no graphical computer that I was working with, and I was in fact doing all sorts of text formatting of physics papers. But I had access to the computers that were in the computer labs, where there was a password that everybody knew, and it would let you on to any of the free terminals, especially in the student center on the top floor. I learned that there was this new experiment happening, and it was called browsing. And I'd been using Telnet and FTP and other clients, but this appeared to be a new way of combining all of the different formats, graphical, sound, and text, into something pre-made. Something like a published zine that would be generated, a page. When I learned that this sort of thing might exist, I found out that I only had to go to a website, download a massive binary, run it, and this browser would show up. This program would take over the screen on this workstation. And if I had something called a web address, I could go to a host on the internet, and I'd be looking at somebody's creation. I had one thought as I started to get my mind around this and started rooting around in 1993. This is going to change everything about computers. It was a bright and blinding light. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood, Daniel Boyd, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. It was pure luck that I was in the right place and the right time and the right institution to immediately experience the absolute beta period of the World Wide Web, of the ability to use HTTP ports and connect with HTML documents and figure out how they were working and the different sort of experiments people were doing, having this drop into their lap. For anybody who wasn't quite there for those first few months, it relied on you going to a website called What's New, where you would literally be told about the dozen or so websites that were popping up, allowing you to run over to them and try out something like a book report or a description of a place or a list of great places to eat in Southern California. You went from page to page, and if you had come up through zine culture or had known newsletters or magazines of a homemade nature, then this all felt strikingly familiar. The cobbled-together language, the simple photographs, and the ability to look at something, click on it, and go on to the next page. It felt revelatory. It felt not just something that we had seen before, because in many ways we had seen it before, but it felt unfurled, unconstrained. You could, if you had a machine connected to the internet, set up one of these sites almost instantly, get them in full color, showing graphics and text of whatever nature you wanted, and people could come to it, be linked to other locations, or you could draw in images or sounds or movies to tell a story. But I should rush to tell you, in terms of music and movies, you weren't getting anything embedded. What you would get was a link, often to a .au file, or download a movie, usually a .mov, to be able to experience anything like multimedia. The whole endeavor had a name, hypertext, and had aspects of HyperCard and other technologies in the 1980s. But the fact that you could do it immediately and share it literally with a world of people in computer labs and business and government, but still a world, was a complete shift in how computer programs and information were going to be presented. Naturally, I thought that our MUD should have one of these. And since we had the tim.org domain, www.tim.org went up, and that website, with its own unique quirks going back to that period, is still up today. One of the original World Wide Web sites. Previously, with bulletin boards and internet, I wasn't at the beginning. I wasn't even at the fake beginning that most people think of as the first days. But with the web, I was definitely there. This was a period when browsers were very rare and barely put together, being done by individuals or small teams trying to deal with what has turned out to be one of the great computer science projects, creating a reader that is flexible to an infinite amount of variation of structure and format tags. It was early enough that I remember in years hence when the center tag showed up, and I thought it was the beginning of the end. Instead of just giving general directions on how a document would go, here was formatting, descriptions, and expectations of how it would ultimately look. I found this heretical. I had strong opinions on how this technology might go. It felt so incredibly important to get it right this time. This felt like, and it turned out to be, the way that millions would be introduced to the online experience. They would go to a page, and the page would have information and context and links, and you would click on those links and go to related subjects, or follow a web ring around and find out other people keeping their own small hearths of knowledge in a subject matter. I got to watch this world rise, this sense of mores and ethics and approach of how you should present things. Make no mistake, people were rambunctious and odd and wrote strange things. But universally, there was a sense of welcoming people to your site, giving them what you had to offer, and freely inviting them to travel on to the next node, the next site that got their attention. Somebody calling it surfing the web felt right. But more than anything else, I internalized a hope that this would be the final chapter, the universal dream of bulletin boards writ large, with graphics and sound and music and interactivity beyond what I'd even hoped in my younger years. I made my own websites. I learned how others worked. And as more and more tags became available, as formatting and fix-ups began to take the place of simple form follows function directives, I kept up where I could. And ultimately, the peak of my interaction with this web experience was probably creating textfiles.com to present in this new heady sphere, this new environment, all of the artifacts that I had collected from bulletin board systems and an era that was disappearing under the loam, not to be remembered. I wrote custom scripts to generate the web pages. I came up with an aesthetic, and I kept to that aesthetic. I never ever changed it. It was what it was, and it is what it is. If I humor myself, I even came up with early weblog software, ideas in 1997 and 1998 to have daily updates of what I was doing in my life and linking out to other experiences. But I'm fooling myself when I do that. My actual inspiration were the id Software finger servers, which I could remember from years hence, where you could keep track of what was going on at id Software by simply looking at the finger and .plan files of all of the different members of id Software. Those were the blogs that inspired my ideas. But I didn't go in that direction. Instead, I moved to ISPs, to becoming a Unix administrator, and to doing my job while watching websites become more and more complicated, strapping on endless amounts of rule sets, of cascading style sheets, of adding executables and Java and plugins, and making it all into what for me was a cacophonous mess on top of the simple violin or gently played piano of an early website. But to my pleasure, you were still able to open up a text editor, write a few tags, and see any modern browser know what to do with it. So I continue to not complain when I see this massive jumbled mess inside of the source of a web page. The fact that we can live among this stream, this constant waterfall of changes and rules and experiences, and still end up with a simple web page that will just work. In the same way that we can use perfect binding and 4-color processes to make a magazine, but someone can still draw on a piece of paper, go to a photocopier or a scanner and a printer, and make their mark. We can still have a 1.0 web. And even though I've met so many of these people that I only knew as words on a page or on a screen, people for whom they affected my outlook and my dreams, and I got to have dinner or walk in a hallway with them or even film them from movies that I was making, the last 20 years of arc of the World Wide Web, now just called the Internet, has been nothing for me but an endless series of lessons and less surprise with every passing year. When the web really broke into the mainstream, when it became a news story that there were websites, the same echoes began that I saw with the Internet and bulletin board systems. Fear, accusation, thrills combined with misery, feel-good stories with a sense of making fun of them at the same time, a deep-worn skepticism that sells. These notes, these ever-present motifs, were part of the technological landscape as much as any website or search engine or projects online and off that integrated the web as I saw it in the decades after decades, from that simple, breathtaking moment in a computing center at MIT in 1993. I was happy when I first saw it. I was joyous and excited. There was that feeling in my hands of wanting to craft something and share it, to find out what this command did or what this different argument or program would create if I used it. I watched it become something of a moneymaker, a commercial entity, something where websites and browsers and all of the attendant attention became, in their own way, revenue generators, websites that would charge you to use them, people who had browsers that cost money and then didn't cost money, add-ons and programs that charged, until finally, by the time I got to leaving the world of being a corporate person and moving to the nonprofit world of the Internet Archive, I felt like I had seen it all, and I was sick of it. I wasn't interested in the narrative people were saying about how you couldn't do this unless there was a profit motive, how if money wasn't the main driving force, nothing would get done. It's a boring and uninteresting tale, and I don't sit around for the end of it. Instead, I fell into the nest of a millionaire's weird dream, a bizarre building in San Francisco that made a version of the web come back through its Wayback Machine and its saving of digital history. I found underneath my fingers the piano that I always wanted to play. And through all of these moments, through computer bulletin board, through a telnet prompt, and through a computing center with a password of root and Mr. Root, I have found my place. Again, I convinced myself that I was in the final round of all of this innovation and technology, that cell phones were just a better computer that you could put in your pocket, that the internet protocols would allow a little more frequency or a little more speed and allow you to send video and sound as easily as we used to send HTML and text. But that would be it. And for not the first time in my life, I was utterly wrong. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere, who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Part 4 is the last part.